Welcome to the third episode of this video series where I take a photo from raw files and edit it in Lightroom so you can see my workflow and understand the way that I think while I edit my photos. Along the way, I'll try to give you tips and I'll also promote the Lightroom presets that I sell on my website. I don't have a ton of behind the scenes on the photo that we're working in today, but it's a silhouette photo and all I have to say is that the sunset was extremely nice. I shot this one with my Nikon D750 paired with this Tokina 28 to 70mm lens that's falling apart. It's a really nice combo. But now let's put it away and jump into Lightroom. And on screen right now you can see the settings that I was using. ISO 50 because there was plenty of light, f2.8 for a shallow depth of field on a lens that I had to focus manually and I kinda missed the focus, and I set the exposure in such a way that I wouldn't blow out my highlights too much while shooting right against the sun. Pretty impossible, but this is a good start. So let's remove the chromatic aberration and enable the camera profile, and I'm going to turn down the distortion because I think it added too much. I'm even going to go as far as adding a bit more distortion control in here, camera profile, and I'll start by camera flat. I need as little contrast as possible out of the raw file. I'm going to increase the shadows to see how many details I was able to capture in them, and also going to tone down the highlights just a bit. Now, because the sky was actually blue, I have this color contrast over here that I might want to work with and either turn it into completely orange or keep it in there for a nice color contrast, but I'll figure that out later on. Now let's go for a tighter crop because I knew I was shooting this for a very wide aspect ratio, but maybe not this wide. So let's check this out. And right now I'm pretty happy with the composition. Maybe adjust for the horizon line a bit. And I'm going to tone down the contrast even more, but don't you worry, we're bringing that back with curves. But before that, I'll add some texture to combat my inability to focus right, and maybe even a bit of clarity, but really subtle with these ones. I'll also knock down the blacks because I actually want to have a black point in the photo, and I'm not going to increase the whites because I already have some pixels over here that I think are blown out. And I'm going to base my edit on my Kodak 2383, either D55 or D65, but I think D55 will win. D stands for daylight balance and 55 is 5500 Kelvin. It's basically the white balance of the film stock. And on my website there are a set of presets for Kodak 2383 emulation. Today I'm using the curves variant that's going to apply just the color curves over here without affecting the luminance curve that you might have already applied to your image. I'm going with D55 because it's really warm and I'm pretty sure that my edit is going to be all orangey. Another great tip if you want to make an image feel warmer is to increase the saturation just in the red channel. And while this right now might start to look like it's blowing out, I'm going to compensate that by reducing the saturation in the blue primary. That's because I know that we have a lot of yellow in the image, and yellow is the opposite of blue. So by decreasing the saturation in the blue channel, I'm also decreasing the saturation of the yellow tones in the photo. And with the help of the white balance, I'm going to push it even further to make sure there are no more blue hues in my sky. This is more of an artistic choice. At this point, the photo is not going to look realistic no matter what, so I'm leaning into it. And before going any further with the local adjustments, I'm also going to apply some grain. For this, I'm using my all-in-one grain preset. This one is applying grain based on luminosity masks. And this way, you can go and have more grain in your highlights and midtones than you have in your shadows. My preset also decreases the sharpness and the amount of details that you see in the shadows, and it's doing that in order to emulate film even better. Speaking of shadows, I think we have a bit too much contrast, so I'm going to bump the black levels a bit, just so we can see some details in the foliage over here. Finally, I want a bit of fade, so I'm going to use my filmic tone limiter. This is the third and last product that I'm going to talk about today. And this one is raising the black point and lowering the white point, but in a manner that's not going to affect the entire image. There's a photo on screen right now explaining it, but let's keep moving. I'm going to start with the local adjustments. First one is a mask that is starting right in the middle of the sun, and what I want to do here is add some dehaze. This is going to add more lightness to the entire zone while also decreasing the contrast pretty much. I want to do this to have an even more dreamy look to the entire image, but I'm going to decrease the exposure just a bit to compensate for the added light. And I'm also going to bump up the exposure just a tiny bit in the entire image because it still feels very dark. Now let's play around with the curves. First, I'm raising the black point even more. I'm increasing the shadow area so I can see more and more details over here. But I'm also going to be careful that while lifting the shadows, I don't bring up the entire image. There's no need to add more light to the already very light sky. So I'm going to control that with 2 more points along the way. And now I can play around and see what level of details I actually want for my shadows without affecting the entire image. And I know it looks really weird, but I think that's about where I want it. Maybe just a bit more lift in the black point, but that's fine right now. Now I'll jump to color grading, and for this image, all I want to do is add a bit of red in the shadows. And since the shadows are so pronounced over here, I'm gonna use the balance slider to make sure that it doesn't add too much red. Swinging this slider towards the highlight zone, it means that whatever I put in the shadows color grade wheel, it's not going to be very strong and it's going to affect just the very deep shadows. And now let's talk about the details. I'm gonna add one more radial gradient over here, and with it I want to target this right part of the image. I don't need as many details over here and also in the bottom part. So with this mask, I'm kinda targeting both zones. Now, here I'm going to increase the blacks just so I reduce the contrast, and I'm going to drop the saturation and clarity a bit. I'm basically trying to replicate lens sharpness falling off towards the edges of the shot. And I'm even going to drop the textures a bit. This way, these branches over here are not distracting. And for the same reason that I want to keep the viewer's eye towards the middle of the frame, I'm gonna add one more linear gradient this time and add a bit of shadow on this side of the image as well. One other thing that I want to make more visible is the foliage in the foreground. I'm using a brush and I'm increasing the highlights a bit and also the shadows just so they become more visible. I'm paying attention though not to paint over here where my shadow would have created a dark zone in the image and there wouldn't be any sun to illuminate the foliage. But I'm going to add a bit of light on this detail over here and just a tad on the bark of this tree. And by the way, if you scroll up or down, you can increase or decrease the size of your brush. And I also have Alt or Option bind it on my mouse right here. So with my thumb, I can switch the brush from adding to subtracting mask on the fly. And keeping it with the theme of focusing the viewer's attention towards the middle of the frame, I'm also going to add a bit of vignetting. And instead of using highlight priority, since this image is very dark, I'm going to use paint overlay. Again, I'm trying to keep it subtle and only trying to affect the edges of the photo on the sides. No vignetting on top and no really need for vignetting on the bottom. So for that, I went to roundness and went to 100%. And there's one more thing that I want to do before finishing this image. And I increase the vibrance a lot and tone down the saturation. This way, the less vibrant tones in the image are brought forward, and now I can increase that saturation just enough that I actually like how the image looks. So these were my tips on turning the photo that you see on your screen right now into this final photo. I hope you liked it and that you learned something, and I'll see you in the next one.